Great. Maybe we should start again. I just got a message that the broadcast just started, so I'll just recap the beginning of my introduction. Again, my name is Adam Grotsky. I'm with USIEF, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here this afternoon for today's talk by Dr. Seemi Mehta on political participation and representation of women in India at the grassroots level. This talk is part of a series that USIEF will be offering throughout the 2021 calendar year to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the worldwide Fulbright program. The Fulbright program was founded in 1946 to promote mutual understanding between the citizens of the United States and citizens around the world. It now exists in 160 countries and boasts close to 400,000 participants over its 75 years. For our part, USIEF has administered close to 20,000 Fulbright grants and other grants since our founding back in 1950. USIEF just announced its latest call for proposals for the Fulbright Nehru and other Fulbright programs. I encourage everyone to take a look at our website, www.usief.org.in, to find out more about our programs. And without any further delay today, let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Seemi Mehta. Seemi Mehta is the CEO and editorial director of Impact and Policy Research Institute, Delhi. She holds a PhD in American Studies from the School of International Studies at JNU and was a Fulbright Nehru Doctoral Research Fellow at Ohio State University. She represented India in the South Asia Connect program for startup entrepreneurs at the Nexus Startup Hub at the American Center, New Delhi, and was subsequently chosen for the 50-day pre-incubation program at the center, which was conducted by IC2 Institute at the University of Texas at Austin. Her areas of research include US and India's agriculture and foreign policies, international security studies, sustainable development, climate change, gender justice, urban environment, and food security. She keeps herself busy, doesn't she? Without any further delay, Seemi, why don't you take it over? It's such a pleasure to have you with us launching our series for Fulbright at 75. Over to you, Seemi.
Wow, that's really an honor. Thank you very much. A very good evening to one and all. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the United States India Education Foundation and the Fulbright program for organizing this event on the occasion of 75 years of the Fulbright program. And it is an absolute honor that the lecture series is being kickstarted with this event. Thank you so much. And also, I would like to thank you for inviting me to speak on a theme which is really close to my heart, which is political participation and representation of women in India at the grassroots. Thank you so much. I would begin with the presentation, and if I could just have a heads up if it is visible, if the presentation is visible.
Everything is perfect.
Great. Thank you so much. Women around the world have had and they continue to have lesser amount of representation in the elected offices vis-a-vis the men colleagues. And it is true for India as well. The current composition of India's parliament, the upper house of the parliament, which is called the Rajya Sabha, has 25 members out of 245 members. So it is just over 10% of the house. In the lower house, which is the Lok Sabha, it has 78 women representatives out of 545 members of parliament, which is again just over 14% of the house. So if we combine, the total representation of women is 103 members out of 790 members, which is, although a record high since our independence, yet it is just around 13% of the total population which represents women in our country. So For those in the audience who may not be familiar with India's governance structure, we have three levels of government. First is the union government, at the government called the Government of India. At the state level, we have the state governments, and at the local levels, if it is in the urban areas, it's called the urban local bodies, and if it is in the rural areas, it's called the Panchayati Raj institutions. My focus of the talk is Panchayati Raj institutions, and for those who do not know what is Raj, Raj means rule. So local self-rule, to translate it crudely. So the roots of Panchayati Raj in India is very ancient, and the village communities, they acted as small republics, and they came together, they joined in small groupings, and they took decisions depending upon the needs and demands of the village communities. And this was also incorporated during the British rule. The Britishers did give due importance to the panchayats at the grassroots level. And it was Mahatma Gandhi who is considered to be the chief proponent that once India is independent, we should actually formalize Panchayati Raj institutions at the rural level. And he really said that Panchayati Raj cannot fully be effective without full participation of women at the grassroots. And they must be made equal contributors in the political deliberations. And so the new government of India after independence, it took unto itself the task of formalizing it. In fact, in the directive principles of state policy, which is part of our constitution, Article 40 highlights that we should have these structures as structures for rural self-government. So with time, what happened was we instituted a number of committees. For example, Balwant Rai Mehta Committee, Ashok Mehta Committee, GVR Rao Committee, etc. So all these committees over a period of time, they got together at separate periods, and they provided recommendations on as to what should be the structure, what should be the mechanism of rural self-government. And these committees were actually the bulwark of providing a constitutional status to the Panchayati Raj institutions. And it came through as the 73rd constitutional amendment. And what you can see on the screen is 74th also is mentioned, which is for the urban local bodies. So 73rd constitutional amendment in 1992 that accorded a constitutional status to the Panchayati Raj institutions. And it was really a great step that these constitutional amendments gave 33% reservation for women in both these structures, both in Panchayati Raj institutions as well as in the urban local bodies. So it must be pointed out that with time, there are many states. In fact, there are 20 states at present who have increased the reservation level to 50%, and that is a very, very good signal. It includes states like Andhra Pradesh, Assam, Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, etc., and of course, a total of 20 states. Excuse me. So, as at present, we have 46% of women Panchayati Raj, women representatives, elected women representatives at the Panchayati Raj level, which in fact, this was provided as an answer in a written reply by Shri Narendra Singh Tomar in September 2020, last year, who is the Union Minister of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj. So 46% is quite a good figure. And in fact, these may be encouraging insofar as the promotion of gender equity, gender equality in the political processes is concerned. But there remains a plethora of issues. So what are the issues that actually hinder the gender equity in this process? So it includes the inadequate role and involvement of women in the political and decision-making processes. their half-hearted incorporation in the developmental activities, which we'll see later as well in the presentation. And then there are half-hearted development measures, especially with respect to vulnerable sections like women, children, children and the unemployed youth, Divyangjan, who is Divyangjan or specially abled people. And also the socio-economic pressures that have been created because of male-dominated patriarchal structures. It actually imparts a lot of negative effect on the gains that have been made in the past, as we saw in the different committees, and all the objectives, the noble objectives that were there. So with this background, it is important to understand what it means by local governance or decentralization. Decentralization actually means that power and the decision-making processes, as well as resources, are transferred from the national level and the state level to the local levels. It is thus closest to the people, and it is also a wide field that allows for community participation. And there also direct access by the people to the community resources, as well as to the people who are elected, the elected representatives, whether men or women. And in fact, it is a way to promote the broader values of pluralistic participatory democracy. With this understanding, it is important to note that these decentralized structures of government are in a best position to actually acknowledge the knowledge of the communities, the people, and also promote their capacities towards sustainable development. And in fact, it has been recognized at the highest levels of international deliberations. As we can see, under Goal 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which calls for achieving gender equality and empowerment of all girls and women. There is a target, which is the 5th target, which calls for ensuring women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision making in political, economic, and public life. In fact, this sustainable development goal is in essence a continuation of the long-standing demands and needs of the women's groups. Women's groups that have actually voiced their needs it has found its presence in the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is called CEDAW, also as part of Goal 3 of the Millennium Development Goal, which again called for promoting gender equality and empowering women. So having had a broad understanding of what is meant by decentralization, it would be appropriate to theorize this whole system in the feminist context of access to public spaces, to discern the inherent and systemic patriarchy that exists in our societies that leads up to the decision-making levels, the political offices. So around the world, patriarchy has been the reason for several forms of segregation and for stereotypical gender norms and roles in the public spaces. The resultant subordination of women is actually rooted in the customary and legal constraints that obstruct women's participation in the so-called public world. And because of such obstructions, then there arises a need for demands or for demanding or for indulging in feminist movements, demanding rights, equal rights in public spaces, etc. So women's political participation is considered to be generally low as per the studies, because they have been differently socialized, and this socialization has occurred in the form of marriage, motherhood, employment, or property ownership, etc., or because simply they do not own enough resources. So an implicit assumption in this is that in these sets of argument is that women often lack the ability, women often lack the capacity to participate in political activity. And this is kind of a different psychology than men, because women consider themselves, or they have internalized amidst themselves, that political life is not meant for them as autonomous actors, and that political participation is not important for them. Vis-a-vis the men, this comes in stark contrast, because they feel that there is an inherent understanding which believes that political participation is actually meant for them. It is their right, and they are supposed to come forward. So there is definitely there is definitely a need to step up the feminist discourses of political participation to the political issues. So essentially, we need to have proactive empowerment programs, especially in the areas of decision making in politics, and these should be targeted at the grassroots level, and then it can go up from there. So for this, what needs to be done? So I advance a feminist empowerment theory, which is a combination of 3 approaches, which is feminist theory, modernization theory, and empowerment theory. So the first theory which leads to this approach is that the inferior status that is delegated to women is due to the societal inequality, which is shaped by political, economic, and social power relations. Social power relations are unequal, and therefore women should have equal access to all forms of power. And this in turn helps the feminist analysis to understand how the women have been oppressed for a long time, and have been dominated. And then this understanding inspires them to engage in efforts to bring about broader social change. The empowerment theories have advocated that women's share of parliamentary seats is one of the most important indicators of measuring women's empowerment. So we can definitely measure, if this is the term, if we extrapolate this in the Indian context, we can very well know how empowered our women is, which says just 13% at the national level, which represents the women. And then finally, the modernization theory, it reckons that the economic growth inevitably leads to social development and gender equality. Authors who deal with conflict suggest that economic growth by itself will not follow an exclusive path. And in fact, it does not follow an exclusive path. Rather, it follows a bi-directional relationship between economic development and women's empowerment. And this women's empowerment is the scholars define it as improving the ability of women to access the constituents of development. So what are these constituents? Maybe it can be health, it can be education, it can be earning opportunities, rights, even political participation. So now it becomes absolutely clear that now it becomes absolutely clear that the PRIs, the Panchayati Raj institutions, are the most fertile governance spaces that could espouse and advance the cause of women's empowerment. So what are the different types of roles that women can play? And women can play through these, through political participation and representation in these institutions. In fact, a noted scholar, Alla Mensa, she spoke about political participation as partaking in the formulation, passage, and implementation of public policies with more emphasis on representative democracy. And if we can just picture in the role of women over here, it becomes further clear. It helps to build ownership over local development, as well as it enhances the leadership capacities of women. So previous studies have also found what are the perceived qualitative implications of women's participation at the grassroots level. So if we can just compare in our minds vis-a-vis men representatives, the male representatives. So women representatives have more patience to hear out the problems of the public. Women are more honest and accurate in presenting issues to the decision-making bodies, the higher-ups, the authorities. They invest more in and they also work hard towards providing affordable drinking water, primary health care, child care, public distribution services. They are very much focused on environmental protection, etc. And they also bring new ideas in local governance through a sustainable development approach. And further, it has been highlighted that women constitute, or rather, they are very strong proponents of communal harmony, which is really essential for India's development. So we can see how positive women's contribution in the Panchayati Raj institutions is. And it is true that the policy of reserving 33% to 50% seats, as we have seen some states have already instituted, in the Panchayati Raj institutions has been a constructive way forward. And there are also studies that evidence that reservations have improved women's participation in the public sphere. Well, there cannot be any doubt. But and also further, they are also partnering with women's collectives and informal groups called the self-help groups in India. This partnership is also leading to integration of the leadership and skills training programs that these self-help groups advance, and they also in their turn, they also advance their own efforts and leadership capacities. Many of us might have heard about the Kudumbashree program in the state of Kerala. To those who are unfamiliar, we can just briefly tell about it. It is actually a movement in the state of Kerala, which is a community organization of neighborhood groups of women. And these groups bring women collectives, or they have women in their groups who gather together, and then they fight for their rights and work on a range of issues like health, nutrition, agriculture, etc. And besides, of course, one of their other aim is income generation activities. And this network brings women to panchayats and voice their concerns, as well as the concerns of the societies, to the women leaders. And it is very encouraging again that this movement has played an important role in strengthening the elected women representatives in their fight against social and patriarchal structures. Very recently, the Kerala local body went to polls, and in December 2020, the results were there. And according to official sources, it is heartening to note that 1/3 of the women elected to these Kerala local bodies have come from Kudumbashree neighborhood groups. So, and to give you a fair number, it is over 21,000 members who have come from Kudumbashree groups. So thus, this has played a very crucial role in women's empowerment and representation, and their representation in the political offices. Next is the empowerment of the vulnerable social groups. Some of us may know that in the Hindu social order, the most vulnerable is the formerly untouchable community, or the scheduled caste community. They're also called Dalit community. According to former Union Minister of Panchayati Raj, Shri Mani Shankar Iyer, he pointed out that the state of Karnataka was able to make rapid strides in the rural local self-government, especially because of increasing representation of Dalit women in the system. So, and then we have another success story. While there are many, tons of them, so I'm just pointing one another. is that of the first international organization for standardization, the ISO certification that is provided for, and this has been given to a panchayat in Madhya Pradesh, which is called Kodaria Panchayat, for quality management system. And this was possible under the able leadership of a woman head, who in Hindi is called Sarpanch, Miss Anuradha Joshi. In fact, she has been awarded also. Her whole panchayat has, under her leadership, has won several accolades, and one being the cleanest, the best in sanitation, the best panchayat in sanitation, etc. When she had entered office, the official account of the panchayat was just 445 rupees, or to convert it into US dollars, it is just 6.8 US dollars. But by 2019-20, the official figures on the official money that was there in the account, it was raised to 20 lakh rupees, which is equal to around 27,000 USD. So how did this happen? Because she was she very ably and confidently and in an accountable manner, she handled the funds that was coming from the central, from the union government, state government, and also she made a lot of effort in increasing the tax base, the taxpayer base, which was initially 5%, and by 3 to 4 years, within 3 to 4 years, 40% people were paying the local taxes. So this was kind of really encouraging. While these examples may be encouraging, yet we must not be blinded with the larger reality. Although women accept appointments after the due electoral processes and also enjoy the government patronage, yet there are times when their own goals of they have their own objectives of how they'll enter into politics, or how they'll bring changes, they often contradict with the prevailing patriarchal structures. It thus offers a lot of doubts that does a mere increase in the number of seats reserved for women would really increase their participation. In fact, their participation is hindered at all levels of Panchayati Raj functioning. They face barriers, especially from family and society. They feel inhibited to speak, especially when they are in large male-dominated gatherings. And when they do attend the meetings, they often lack confidence to raise their own opinions and priorities. And for those who really muster up the courage to speak, they really receive less of support. And how do they receive less of support? For example, they receive less respect, or they receive less attention, or even they're given less amount of time to speak vis-a-vis their male colleagues. And oftentimes they are also stigmatized and labeled as wayward, and also being irresponsible by the society because of ignoring their household responsibilities and for being overly ambitious. So, and also many times women are invited only to complete the quorum of the proceedings. And a majority of women have also revealed that why do they not want to participate in politics? So many of them say that the meeting timings are not comfortable. It usually happens late in the evening. There's a lot of illiteracy prevalent among women, and violence has actually been reported to be one of the detrimental factors, because the manner in which the local officials and the male participants they use verbal abuses, physical abuses, violence, etc., and that scares women, and they finally describe it as being very intimidating, and as a result they withdraw from the entire process. In fact, there was an open forum that was organized by the Rural Litigation and Entitlement Center with around 300 elected women representatives in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And some of the observations that came up was that many women, because of sheer lack of support, equal support rather. They said that these orders, the government orders, or rather the whole act itself, it was really a mockery, because there were a number of malpractices that were going on, blatant practice of commission that was demanded by the block level staff, and many women there were branded as being incompetent, and in fact forced to quit because the villagers, they passed no confidence motion against them. And there's also an indication that there exists a high level of illiteracy among the female representatives. And this is quite funny, but it is a reality that the husbands, they act as sarpanch patis. If you translate it into English, it is sarpanch husbands, because they are acting on their behalf, on the behalf of these women. And also there's a lot of interference by the brothers-in-law, the fathers-in-law, and they act as proxy decision makers. And of course, the widespread corruption among the male participants and the local bureaucrats has also been reported. So what does this lead to? Essentially, these lead to low level of self-esteem, which translates into longer lead times for the elected women representatives. In the initial days of being elected, these women feel that they do not have the requisite professional skills or the decision-making skills, and hence to learn their work and to how to for example, behave in the public political office that they are going to occupy. They need the support of the male relatives. And the patriarchal barriers add to the problem of limited capacities. So there are several schemes of the government. For example, the Community Action for Health, it comes under the National Health Mission of Government of India, and also the school management committees. And this comes under the Right to Education Act of 2009, which has become a fundamental right. These mandate these two schemes, for example, they mandate a lead accountability role for the elected representatives, and this is equally applicable for both men and women. But there is a certain level of lack of clarity about their role and their limited capacities, especially of the women. It compounds to their difficulties, so they are not able to fully participate in such community action for health, or for even in the school management committees. So thus we can see that women are not fully able to participate in the grassroots politics. Nonetheless, we have 46% women in the Panchayati Raj institutions. And despite the several hurdles, as I've just pointed out, women are rolling up the sleeves and entering into the political fray. There was a study that was conducted, in fact, it was conducted by UC Berkeley in India, for 8 states in the country, and it pointed out that those women who were able to disengage themselves from the household activities were more likely to be candidates in the local elections. So, in other words, if women are less constrained in the household chores and the tasks, they are more active participants in the political processes. And for this, certainly, it is very important that men of the household take responsibility for the household tasks. And the women's participation as elected representatives, which were hitherto dominated by the so-called developmental activities, now have confidently evolved into the domain of decision-making, spending decisions of the government funds. And the women representatives are also pressing for legislative and constitutional changes. So this is, again, an encouraging phenomenon. How do we sustain and catalyze this process? This is important. Excuse me. So how do we catalyze this process? In fact, I have put certain policy recommendations in place because the failure of the patriarchal dominated state to incorporate women's issues into the governance is a contributing factor to prioritize and also to ensure that women's participation in the political offices, it happens more proactively. And a plus side to this is that it would not just restrict the women in sincere dealing of their own issues, the issues related to women, but also encourage a balanced approach to all other areas of work. So they can definitely act as development catalysts in their constituencies. Firstly, we would need to have more empowerment programs, especially in the areas of decision making and participation in politics. It should be targeted at women's groups at the grassroots level by the governments and all stakeholders as a matter of priority. The peer learning is very important. Peer learning is a core strategy used to spearhead the work of the grassroots organization. In fact, the Huairou Commission, which was set up in the Fourth World Conference conference in Beijing, the Beijing Conference as it is famously known as, in 1995, it really focused on local to local dialogues. So perhaps we should learn from this. Then partnerships with local governments has come to be recognized that the development work, including service delivery, is really is both effective and relevant to the local needs. And this is important because only through community participation things can be really, changes can be really brought about. Women representatives at the state and national levels. At the state level, they are members of Legislative Assembly, and at the national level, of course, members of Parliament, should frequently visit the elected representatives at the local level, and they should hear out the problems, and also solve the problems faced by the women leaders. And related literature has also revealed interesting strategies, motivational strategies for women to really, and this is applicable for everybody, and this can be applicable here as well. There are two types of motivational strategies, the extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic is more related to tangible rewards such as salaries, fringe benefits, etc. And this is largely beyond the control of an individual. But intrinsic motivation is also important because it refers to psychological rewards such as receiving appreciation, positive recognition, or even being awarded, etc. Like in the case of Miss Anuradha Joshi. So in Madhya Pradesh. So these can be these can be applied and in fact proactively applied. And then we should, the women should also be provided with regular support to meet the government officials, to raise their findings and to raise their concerns in the service level deliveries. It is also very important to monitor the quality of trainings that is being handed out by the government training institutes in the different states. In fact, the state governments do train the elected representatives, the newly elected ones, but there are so many sheer number of representatives and the multiple exclusions that are faced by the women members. There is an urgent need to repeat and reinforce these trainings at regular levels. In fact, the governments must partner with research and advocacy organizations to impart such trainings efficiently. And of course, in the digital era and widespread access to mobile phones, technology-based solutions may be really important, and it would really be important without any doubt to reinforce the training inputs and provide critical information that will give women panchayat leaders the confidence to play their part and also in the effective delivery of the services. So to conclude, women's participation in political processes is very important, not just for strengthening democracy, but also for their struggle against marginalization, trivialization, and oppression. unless these structural changes are brought about and challenges are effectively addressed, the noble objectives of Panchayati Raj institutions would really remain far from reality. And this is because effective development occurs from the grassroots up. I stop here and I would be happy to discuss further with the August gathering. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Simi, for your interesting and insightful presentation. So I would request participants to please type in their questions in the chat box. And before we go ahead in addressing the questions from the participants, I would like to invite Dr. Dia Dutt, Deputy Director of USIF, to give the closing remarks. Over to you, Dr. Dutt.
Thank you, Suranjana. Simi, what an excellent presentation. You know what? I was remembering my first interaction with you way back in 2014 when you came in to attend the Fulbright Mentoring Program at USIF. From there, it has been just an incredible journey for you. You've made us so proud. I especially salute the entrepreneur in you because you have taken a very unconventional path of, going ahead and taking initiative to establish an independent think tank, which provides, voices, different voices on burning issues, facing the country and, others around the world. So thank you so much for being a real Fulbrighter in action. I salute your entrepreneurial spirit. Coming back to your presentation, Simi, this is again a topic very close to heart. I'm a political scientist by training, so very optimistic view, balanced with, what are the realities that exist in terms of, systemic forces that prevent, women from, participating in the political process. We've also highlighted some best examples, which gives us a lot of hope for the future. So thank you for an effective presentation, very enlightening. I would now request the audience, to ask questions and, enjoy the engagement. Thank you again, Simi.
Hi, so I'm going to read out, we have few pertinent questions. So I'm going to read those out to Simi and then we can just go answering one by one. I'm going ahead with the first question. As you mentioned, scheduled caste people were untouchables in India. Do you find any difference in scheduled caste women sarpanch performance and upper caste women sarpanch? Is any scheduled caste women sarpanch successful performance in her tenure? So what are the factors that support her? And if not, what are the obstacles faced during her tenure?
Hi, am I audible? I think.
Yes, I think you can switch off your camera because your voice is breaking. Yeah.
Yes, the camera is just switched off. Can you just take it down from your end?
It's very low from your side. That's why it could be the problem. So please plug in your PC now. That's what the message is showing.
Yes, but I have joined from another system. So.
Okay, please go ahead.
Suranjana, can you take the presentation down from your end?
Just a second.
You can do it, Simi, because you are the presenter now.
Well, the system has turned off and I'm not able to turn it on.
Please go ahead with the questions. Q&A.
Okay, okay. Yes, yes. Yes, so Ranjana, I'm sorry I heard you the halfway through. The
No
difference
issues.
between upper caste and lower caste sarpanches, right?
Is there any difference? Do you find any difference in the scheduled caste women sarpanch performance and upper caste women sarpanch?
Okay, okay. So this is a very, very important question that needs to be addressed, and it has to be addressed in a larger realm. You know, it is not that the ability of both women of women from upper caste and lower caste is different. Of course, their educational qualifications may come in the way in either side, but it is more about acceptability from the society. It is generally found that upper caste women have a better say and better acceptability of decision making as compared to that of the Dalit women or those belonging to the lower caste. And this is again inherent in the systemic social order, the Hindu social order that we have. That in fact, there was a very recent example where a Mahila Sarpanch, a woman Sarpanch was made to sit on the floor in the office of bureaucrat, and this gathered a lot of media attention. And this actually shows that women sarpanches from the Dalit background, they are able to voice their concerns less effectively than that had they belonged to an upper caste. But certainly their capacities and abilities cannot be differentiated or cannot be compared, because everybody has their own set of weaknesses and also the perfections. So yeah, that is my response to it. It is more about acceptability of the society. As it is, women are less accepted in the political fray and amongst the minds of the villagers, and many of them also feel that okay, this is just for completing the 33% reservation agenda that is there. So the seriousness has to come from the society itself, and rather the male dominated society. Back to you, Suranjana.
Thank you, Simi. The next question is, what changes do you suggest are crucial and necessary for the propagation of women in PRIs and also in the whole political process?
Well, to increase the participation, we already have we have the scheme, right? We have the scheme, or 33 to 50% reservation of seats are there, and you cannot feel, I mean, any political party or any non-woman cannot be fielded where the seat is reserved for the women. So as it is, we still have a long way to go. It's not even 50%, as you see, based on Minister Tomar's response. We are not even 50% of the total representation when it comes to women elected representatives in the Panchayati Raj institutions. So the scheme is there, and it is more about, again, how seriously we are taking the women candidates and how seriously we are fielding them, or we are understanding their concerns and the need to elect them. So this is important. And here I would like to, I did not point this out in my presentation, and I take this opportunity to do it here, is that, you know, over the period of last maybe a decade, the courts, the high courts, and also the Supreme Court, they have become very proactive in ensuring that the transgender are represented as well, the transgender women especially. And recently we have seen examples in various panchayats, like in Kerala polls, in Karnataka polls, in Rajasthan polls, we have had transgender women as sarpanches. So it is again more about acceptability. When they are fielded, it is about who is bandwagoning, who is coming behind them and rallying for them. And again, if this sort of understanding is strengthened, then it has to go up, because in my last slide I said that the development process goes upwards, the grassroots, it goes grassroots up. So it is high time that we have, we 7 decades of our independence. It is high time that we have 33 to 50% reservation of seats even in the national parliament. It is still pending, long pending in the Lok Sabha, and the current government has all the majority, it has the numbers to see it through. So I really urge the government to take note of this and go forward in this. So this is how we would be bringing about real changes. Although it is going to be slow, but the task would be at hand. So that is my response. Back to you, Suranjana.
Yeah, thank you, Simi. Simi, you have spoken about different recommendations and policies. So the next question is related to that. The question says, considering the diversity in languages and the fact that many of the recommendations may be in English, how are these accessed locally, especially to reach remote areas with high rate of illiteracy? So are these recommendations or policies translated?
So these recommendations are my recommendations based on the studies that I have done. And of course, this can be translated into different languages. But for the schemes that are there, the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment, the schemes, the national policies that are there, so these are all, these are available in different languages. So I don't think there is a hindrance towards that. And it has been effectively implemented across the country in all the panchayats. So that is not that should not be an issue. And with respect to the recommendations that I have provided, this can certainly be translated. That is okay, no problem with that. And rather, it should be translated. Yeah, thank you.
Next question, I'll go ahead with the next question. Is there any board or agency that oversees political misconduct in terms of mistreatment of women in politics? And who is responsible to responding and sanctioning male political colleagues that mistreat or disrespect women in politics?
Well, this is I'll take the second question first. Is that who sanctions? We should rather ask it to ourselves. Who is the sanctioning authority? It is the male-dominated patriarchal society that sanctions, that gives people the right. And it is basically these male-dominated patriarchal structures that intimidates women, and they sort of internalize it. They internalize it that okay, this is not a space for me. Otherwise mistreatment would not happen. So the sanctions are coming from the patriarchal society that is widely prevalent in the country, in our country, unfortunately. And about the boards or the legal mechanisms where we can go, where the women can get access to, certainly there is the National Commission for Women, the State Commission for Women. They take suo motu cognizance of such problems or such challenges that women are faced with, or even the or the treatment, the bad treatment that is meted out to them. And of course, the Supreme Court and the courts are there as a resort, because right against exploitation is one of the fundamental rights. And women who are treated in this manner, especially the Dalit women, the Dalit sarpanches, they can certainly approach the courts, and they can directly approach it because it comes under the fundamental rights. Yeah. And in fact, I would also say that women's representation in the courts also should be increased, rather, because as we know that there are so many pending cases. So it just depends that who is in the higher ups and the higher rungs, that that the cases are heard quickly and smoothly. But for such cases, it just is long pending. So that is my response.
Thank you, Simi.
Yes,
I have another question which
yes.
relates to different societal issues that we have in our country. So the question says, how the women political representatives have helped in curbing some of the social evils such as dowry, untouchability, or child marriage in India?
Yes, so as I had also mentioned during the course of my presentation, they have been really strong advocates of social change, of changes, of bringing in changes with respect to the evils that are prevalent in our society, as all the challenges that you have mentioned, child marriage, dowry, etc. And studies have also shown that once this really comes into their ears, or people inform them, they take necessary steps forward. But certainly, just because it is coming to their ears, and then it depends upon the social status of that particular mahila, the woman sarpanch. um, Limited aspects or limited social issues are, it goes higher up, so limited impact is there. But certainly these women representatives have taken enormous amounts of uh, um, enormous amounts of they have heard the challenges, and then they have tried their best to resolve their issues. And also, because of their growing proximity with the state level members of legislative assemblies, especially the women leaders, um, their voices are being heard. So it is not a bad situation, but certainly a lot can be done. The limited impact can be expanded, and uh, we can see more better changes in the future.
Thank you, Simi. I
Yes.
think we have time to take the last question. We have one more question that just came in, so I'm going to read that out. While we have the representation of women in Panchayat, their role remains more like a figurehead, and decision making is mainly by their husbands and sons. So how do you think we can empower women sarpanch to assert their position and take up active leadership roles?
Absolutely. This is a very important question, and this whole dilemma of sarpanch patis or sarpanch husbands who are actually relegating the real sarpanches, their wives or their relatives to the position of being dummy sarpanches, dummy heads. It needs to be changed, and in fact the societal patriarchal norms need to be changed in a way that there is wider acceptability. And how can women themselves, how can they take it heads on? It would, I would say it is already happening, and it will take some time to really see real changes. And with these 2 to 3 examples that I have shared, these are the stepping stones rather. So we need to sensitize the women. We need to have sensitization programs for men, for male uh, male representatives at the panchayat level. And a lot has to be done, or a lot of impact is created when it comes from the higher up, the leaders. For example, our prime minister is such a good orator. If he speaks on these issues, people might take it to heart, and if this continues, if this is like a rolling thing, it would create a ripple effect. So if such awareness and such sensitization, and of course training programs are there, as I mentioned, that the governments must join hands with advocacy organizations, with research organizations, to provide training to the new members. What are their rights, what are their powers, what is their area of jurisdiction, and if they are illiterate, how can they use or how can they navigate through this challenge of illiteracy while taking their decisions. All these can be really translated into effect. So yeah, that would be my response. And once this is through or in the process, they would also foster an active participation in the labor market. They would also foster greater amount of participation in the society. There are social practice or social or cultural events, etc. In all these areas of public spaces, these programs can be held. These programs for relegating or highlighting rather the role of women, the necessity of women, of the people to respect their head, sarpanch, whether it is a man or a woman. So that kind of equality training has to be engendered in the minds of the people, and it can definitely start from the school level education. Why not? Yes, back to you, Suranjana.
Thank you, Simi, for answering all the questions and for your insightful comments and suggestions. And thank you everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions, you can write to Simi or you can even write to us and we'll be happy to forward them to Simi.
Yes.
Take care, everyone. Yeah.
Yes.
Bye.
That would be great. Thank you very much again. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm grateful.